Okay guys, let's jump right in. I am all set and ready for this video. There's a lot of information that I want to let you know about that's happening in Iceland. You know, we've been busy the last 2 days with what's going on at the supervolcano in Grindavík. There was a groundbreaking study and some concerning news in my opinion. So now we have to look at what's happening on the Reykjavik Peninsula in Iceland again. And specifically, what does that mean for the little fishing town of Grindavik? Let's start with the Icelandic Meteorological Office. They have released an updated hazard map and they keep changing the hazard level in some zones back and forth. Does that make a lot of sense? Because we've known for about 2 weeks, or definitely like since May 9th, when the eruption stopped, that the magma chamber was basically full again, and they were saying next event in 24 hours, then at any time without warning. But they lowered the risk assessment in, if you look at that map here, in zone 7, that's where we have the Grindavik golf course that is about to open. Was that related? I sometimes have the feeling, because I sometimes lower the risk where the lagoonies are, just to be able to open again. But now they have changed this back to orange. So I don't know what that means for the golf course. Will it open despite that increased hazard level? I mean, overall, the police chief of Sudorns and the civil defense are saying, stay out of this area. We don't want you in these areas. And whoever is in these hazard areas, and that's everything that's basically colored here on this map, you're at your own risk. So basically nobody's responsible for your actions. You are responsible for your actions and inactions. And if something happens to you, your fault, right? So that's why going to businesses or going to like the Blue Lagoon or something that's in this area, it's your own risk. And people are not, especially tourists, are not aware of this, because most of them don't even know that an eruption was so close to the Blue Lagoon, or that the Blue Lagoon sits on this magma chamber that's producing all the mess. So we will have to see, why did they increase the level? Well, let's have a look. So we know that the total amount in the magma chamber is way over 16 million cubic meters. I think we're approaching 17 million cubic meters. The land rise keeps going. It hasn't slowed down. So there's still the continuous land rise. That magma chamber keeps filling up. And we'll talk about this in a minute. There's news about the amount of that magma chamber compared to what happened on November 10th, which is very interesting. Of course, they're saying more scenarios need to be looked at right now. What could happen since this magma chamber is filling up? The land rise continues without, at the moment, a new magma intrusion or an eruption. So this magma accumulation underneath Svartsengi, where the Blue Lagoon and the power plant is located, remains stable, but nothing has happened so far. So scientists are scratching their heads again. But of course, what they're stating is, and that's in relation to that new assessment of this risk map, is there's an increased chance of a new magma run that could end up just an intrusion remaining underground, or in an eruption. An eruption is probably more likely, and they think it's most likely in the Sutnuka crater series, where we have seen most of the previous eruptions. That is zone 3. But we did have an eruption in zone 4 at the doorsteps of Grindavik in January. You can also see the magma flows. That's when like 3 homes were burned down by the lava. The warning time for this eruption may be very, very short. That's what they keep saying. So why is the risk higher in area 7 and might destroy the fun of the people to play golf in between cracks and sinkholes? So the risk of gas contamination in area 7 has been raised in connection with the increased probability of a new eruption in area 3. Well, that was the case the last 2 weeks, and then, you know, why now? It's kind of strange, right? So they're saying, like, due to the change, the overall risk in the area is now estimated to be considerable. That means color orange. Previously, it was some risk, it was yellow, and the risk due to gas pollution in all other areas is unchanged from last week and assessed as considerable. So, and here it comes, and that's interesting. They're saying due to increased seismic, microseismic activity within zone 4, that's Grindavik. The risk of seismic activity has been increased there. So the microseismic activity that we've seen basically between Grindavik and Mount Thorbjorn mostly, that's what's concerning, because is that an indication that we have magma going in that area? Could we see an eruption there? That would be devastating for Grindavik potentially, right? So if they're estimating that it's going to erupt in the area that we've already had, like basically the same area where the last eruption was, there is still a very considerable risk for lava flow towards Grindavik, because the past eruption has built up a high lava carpet that is higher in some areas than the defense walls. That's why they're still building a second row of defense walls within the old defense walls, so closer to Grindavik, to divert a breach of the old defense walls. But they need probably another week and a half to have those finished at a height of about 5 meters. The MET Office lays out potential scenarios of what could happen now, since this volcanic system keeps us waiting again, right? And to stay awake, there's some coffee needed, because it keeps fooling us a little bit, right? It's not doing what everyone expected, which I said, scientists know that they don't know. They're scratching their heads. So potential scenarios of what could happen is an eruption between Silingafell and Stora Skogfell. So that's basically in the middle of zone 3. If you look at this hazard map, you can already see like that darker area, that line here, that's basically where we already had eruption. So it's a similar location to the eruption that started on December 18th. In 23, the February 8th eruption, and the last eruption that we have seen, the March 16th eruption. So a probable cause would be for that new eruption a local series of small earthquakes, like a microseismic event between Stora Skogfell and Silingafell. So if we see something like this on the earthquake maps, that all of a sudden it's like boom, 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 one earthquake after the other, that could mean something is happening. If we also see an acceleration in deformation and pressure changes in boreholes in the area that are testing what's going on, then in this area, because all the tunnels are there from the magma chamber underneath Svartsengi into that area, there would be very short notice. We've seen this in the last eruptions, basically no warning time. Less than 30 minutes, they're saying, but they're also saying this time even no notice, as we have had that in the past. And then they say the lava could reach the main access road that goes from Grindavik north, passes the area of the Svartsengi power plant and Blue Lagoon, if you want to go closer to Keflavik or Reykjavik. That's the main access road, Grindavík. It could reach this road, the new eruption, within 2 to 4 hours. So consider the evacuation time for the Blue Lagoon is usually roughly 45 minutes to an hour. And they're waiting it out always to the last minute. So they're not saying we're closing down our establishment right now, so that our people do not have to go through another emergency evacuation. You've seen my past videos. They have a bus driver on standby that is basically locked into the hotel and needs to drive a bus to get people out. But it has lasted about an hour in the past, so they need Grindavik to get out of there, right? And Grindavik, you can see on the map, has been breached 4 times. 2 times where the Blue Lagoon is located, and 2 times at the doorsteps of Grindavik, basically, from these new lava flows. Scenario number 2, that would be not so good for Grindavik. If we see an eruption south of Hagafell like we have seen in January. South or southwest of Hagafell, that's more like between Mount Thorbjörn and Grindavik. So that would be the southern part of zone 3 on this hazard assessment map. And that would be a similar location to the January 14th eruption. And we've seen 3 homes were burned down and lava was flowing in that area towards Grindavik. So had that eruption been longer and more powerful, would not have been good for Grindavik. And in January, the magma chamber underneath Svartsengi was not even close to being that full as it is now. So what would happen before we would see an eruption there? Again, microseismic activity, an earthquake swarm would manifest near Stora Skogfell or Silingerfell or more south. Acceleration in deformation and pressure changes in the boreholes in the area. Of course, same stuff would happen. The eruption warning in this area would likely be a little bit longer than in scenario 1 because the magma maybe needs to travel a little more, but they say how much more time they would have for a warning is quite uncertain. And so I'd be very, very careful. The warning time is probably also not very long and close to 0. Then they're saying, of course, the lava could reach the defense walls of Grindavik in about an hour. So it also took about an hour to evacuate Grindavik the last time. There's 3 evacuation roads that people could choose from: going north on Grindavík or going out west or going out east. So if I was in there, I would not take Grindavík because I'd be worried that it's already breached by lava. It's maybe at the Blue Lagoon area, right? If I make it out of Grindavik. So I'd go west towards like Keflavik, closer towards Reykjavik. So 1 hour, it could reach the defense walls. Then they say a magma intrusion that would extend to south of Hagafell will likely cause significant fissure movements in Grindavik, because that would be something similar to what we've seen on November 10th. And we know most of the damages that have occurred in Grindavik, these large cracks that open up fissures in the roads underneath buildings, that made this destruction that was shocking us all, tearing down pipes and electric cable, underground plumbing system, that was caused by that magma intrusion on November 10th that came with a lot of seismic activity close or in Grindavik. So that scenario, bad for Grindavik, but it is a likely scenario since we're seeing earthquakes in that area and have seen the past few days, a week and a half. So these are basically the 2 scenarios that they're having a closer look at. Some have said maybe the system is changing as a whole and maybe it's moving to Antwerp. But the earthquakes that we're seeing and all the indications, in my opinion, right now, do not indicate that the system is moving towards Antwerp. I think if we're seeing something that's threatening Grindavik again, unfortunately. And that something is rumbling tells us that we also not only have the continued land rise in the Svartsengi area, we also have the continued seismic activity. So roughly 70 earthquakes have been recorded in the area in the last 24 hours. The biggest earthquake was just last night, had a magnitude of 1.3. So it is more in the microseismic area if it's below 1. The Icelandic Meteorological Office is saying right now we don't have any specific changes in the system. There is this ongoing seismic activity throughout the whole magma corridor. We continue to monitor. That's all that we can do. So if I look at what's going on with the earthquakes in Iceland as a whole, it's a little bit more quiet the last few hours. So if you look at that graph here, everything that's orange, that's basically within the last 4 to 12 hours. Anything that's red, that's new. So there is nothing on the Reykjanes Peninsula, but definitely you can see Saturday morning, the yellow stuff. There's a lot of yellow over magnitude 2 as well. And then there's a microseismic swarm. We see the orange stuff. So that was just Saturday afternoon till early Saturday evening. But since then, it's quiet. What does that mean? It's hard to tell. Let's look at the Reykjanes Ridge. That's the North Atlantic Ridge that separates Iceland, basically, where two tectonic plates are separating from each other. So there were larger earthquakes at Aldi, but also there, nothing new. It looks quiet for now. And then we can have a closer look at the map of the Reykjanes Peninsula. Of course, you can see in the area at the tip of the peninsula where Grindavík is, there has been a lot of activity. There has been a lot of activity at the lake here too at Kleifarvatn. That's the Grindavík system. So that should worry us too, because the Grindavík system is one system. If you look up north where Reykjavik is, past lava flows long time ago have reached in areas where we have the suburbs of Reykjavik. So this is one that could threaten to have lava flows into Reykjavik. But also there, everything seems to be quiet as of right now while we're speaking. What all the scientists disagree on, this is the longest cycle of magma accumulation underneath the Blue Lagoon in the Svartsengi area since the beginning of the events. That's for sure. And the scientists are also saying nobody would be surprised if the eruption started today. Paul Einarsson, he's a professor emeritus at the University of Iceland's Faculty of Earth Scientists. He says he thinks eruption will start again very, very soon. And he says the current conditions are indicating this, but it's impossible to know when. That's what he says, right? It's difficult. But he says it's important to pay close attention and make sure there are no surprises, and that we have to assume that the course of events can get out of hand and can take some unexpected direction. So how I interpret this is be on very high alert level in these areas that are mapped out on this hazard map, because technically it could erupt anywhere. We could see all of a sudden, boom, we see a new seismic swarm starting somewhere else, and then we see an eruption. So it's not that everyone can lean back and can say, well, let's have the people in Grindavík, let's have the lagoonies at the Blue Lagoon all safe, it'll erupt in the same area, nothing's going to happen. No, what he is saying is be on alert, look at the smallest signs, and in light of that, close down, evacuate early. It's not even an evacuation right now. It would be close the Blue Lagoon, do not haul new tourists in there. And tell the people in Grindavík, get your belongings, get out if you can, right? Maybe just have the people in the fish processing plant that are dealing with fresh produce, shit hits the fan, so to speak, they can still jump on a boat and get out. If there is nothing going on through that magma tunnel that would reach the sea, because if seawater mixes with magma, that could be explosive. Not explosive enough probably to cause a tsunami or something like this, but we know at Campi Flegrei that volcanic system stretches in the port of Pozzuoli, in the Gulf of Pozzuoli. So there's earthquakes underneath the sea. If we had an eruption there, it would be explosive and it could cause 100 feet, a 30-meter wave tsunami that would roll towards the coast of Naples. Check out my videos about that. So, of course, he also gives his opinion whether this large fill amount of that magma chamber underneath Svartsengi would be an indication that we will see a bigger eruption than what we've seen before. And then of course he can't give a direct answer. He says it's impossible to say, it's not exactly possible to say that there is any connection between that fill amount and the power of the next eruption. But he says there is no doubt that there is an imminent eruption in the vicinity of Grindavik. So that's what he's saying. And I really value his opinion. I think he's one of the seasoned experts, and I think he's very reasonable with what he says, and he's usually very careful with what he says. So if he says that, it tells me there is quite a risk right now for something unpleasant to happen. He compares what is happening at the Svartsengi volcanic system with the Crustal eruptions. He says there are some similarities between these eruptions. For example, that the volcanic activity is basically divided up in periods of eruption, periods of nothing, period of eruption. Not nothing, right? Because the magma chamber is filling up, the land is rising again. He says, on the one hand, there's periods that are safe, and then it's unlikely that an eruption will start. And on the other hand, a period of caution is happening where there would be a chance of a new eruption or magma flow. What is different here at the Svartsengi area than what was in the Crustal area is here we are dealing with a plate separation. Two tectonic plates are separating from each other. That's why we see most of the earthquakes there. And by tearing apart from each other, it opens the way for magma from underneath to come to the surface. So it's a thrust belt on the Reykjanes Peninsula. And there's more than one volcanic system involved in the scenario if you look at the systems here. And that's also different from Crustal. And what is different here also since the last eruption started on March 16th. Usually in the past, when an eruption had started, the magma chamber was emptying out, the land was subsiding, and then once the eruption stopped, the magma chamber started filling up again. But basically when the eruption started, it started filling up. It wasn't really emptying out. So we also had to deal with the fact that while this eruption was even going, the magma chamber had reached a point that was more than when previous eruption had started. So while the one eruption was going, we had the risk for another eruption again. So there was no period of, oh, let's relax completely. And then when the March eruption stopped on March 9th, we right away knew next eruption is imminent. So there was no period of relaxation to say magma chamber probably needs 3 to 4 weeks to fill up again like it did in the past. No, it was fuller than ever. So that's why we're sitting here waiting. So in light of all that, the Icelandic Meteorological Office is saying something, that is concerning again. So we've just talked about the two possible scenarios that they have outlined what could happen in the next event. But they are also saying, and now we're having a closer look at this, and I think it's very interesting. They're saying the total volume of magma in the magma chamber underneath the Svartsengi, the Blue Lagoon, and the power plant has never been higher since before November 10th. So November 10th was when we had that massive earthquake swarm start, when the magma did grind this 15-kilometer long magma tunnel underneath Grindavík going into the area 3 Stora Skogfell Sunuka crater series, a 15-kilometer long magma dike. Magma was shooting in there but didn't make it to the surface, but it was grinding through there. It needed to grind this new tunnel. So a lot of force was needed, and that's why we had these massive earthquake swarms, and that's why there was so much damage in Grindavík. So before that November 10th event happened, the magma chamber was even fuller than it was now, but never again since then. That's what they're saying. So that's why, if that magma chamber that we have underneath Svartsengi right now keeps filling up more and more without an event, they need to consider additional scenarios of what might happen. So they're saying, if we say that the magma pressure in the magma chamber is increasing underneath Svartsengi, we also have to look at the total amount of magma that is estimated to be present there. So they're saying last year, 2023, from October 25th to November 10th, so before the event started, there was more than 10 million cubic meters of magma accumulated under Svartsengi when this 15-kilometer long magma tunnel formed on November 10th. So you have to consider in the time frame from basically 2 weeks, October 25th, 2023 to November 10th, 2023. In that time frame, more than 10 million cubic meters of magma have accumulated in addition in that magma chamber underneath Svartsengi. That's what they have measured. Then that 15-kilometer long magma tunnel was formed on November 10th. And here comes the interesting part. It is estimated that around 80 million cubic meters of magma left the magma chamber. So how was that possible? If you look at that graph here, there's a bigger magma reservoir underneath it. So where was it coming from? So they're saying, therefore, it can be assumed that about 70 million cubic meters of magma was present in the magma chamber under Svartsengi at that point in time. So if that is really true, I'm raising the question, why are they saying the magma chamber is reaching the point of maximum elasticity? If we're at like 17 million cubic meters, if this thing can hold 70 million cubic meters. So interesting, right? They're saying that the magma accumulation has continued uninterrupted since then, and magma has flowed at least 5 times from Svartsengi to the Sutnuka crater series. Yeah, it has flown uninterrupted, but the land did subside because the magma chamber was losing magma during the past eruptions. Just the last one was different because the land kept rising, although magma was flowing out. So at some time they said there's a balanced flow from the deeper magma reservoir and it's flowing right out. And what they're saying is that each magma flow or each eruption, so each intrusion or eruption has not exhausted the magma accumulation area. So it has not emptied out that magma chamber fully. And that's why they're saying the initial position of magma accumulation underneath Svartsengi is different in each cycle after this November event. And that's why they're showing that graph. So what we have to understand, and I'm giving the answer to my question here, is when I said, well, I thought the maximum amount is when the magma chamber has an amount of 8 to 13 million cubic meters. So there is already magma in the magma chamber. And then when there's an additional amount of 8 to 13 million cubic meters, then they say it reaches the point of maximum elasticity. Because that then explains how like close to 80 million cubic meters of magma did shoot out of it on November 10th. So this is just what is added on top of it that causes the next eruption. And then usually we had eruption, magma chamber was filling out a little bit, and then it started to fill up again. But it wasn't emptying out completely, except probably November 10th. So only a little bit was flowing out. So that tells us there is enough power in this thing to create something as powerful as that 15-kilometer magma dike again, where 80 million cubic meters could shoot out at once. So you have to look at that new graph a little bit, knowing that the scientists cannot measure or make a 3D image of that magma chamber that's underneath Svartsengi. They don't know. They can only estimate. They don't have many scientific tools available to really say where it is, what it is. But, you know, look at my video that I just released yesterday about the groundbreaking new study and the methods that they used at Campi Flegrei to really define that magma chamber, and that they found, oh, it's way more closer to the surface. Check out that video. It's an interesting, because you can relate to what maybe they should do more here at Svartsengi as time goes on. But you might think that graph looks weird. Why is there a minus? So we're looking at what happened between October 25th and November 10th. That's that purple line here that starts at 0 and then goes up to probably like something like 13, 15, 16 million cubic meters. That it did, they're saying 10, this graph looks a little bit more than 10. So let's say 10. So from October 25th to November 10th, 10 million cubic meters have been added. And then it did shoot out 80 million cubic meters into that 15-kilometer long magma tunnel. So it was emptying out, and that's why we see here it's minus 65 or something when we see that blue line start, because they only could measure the land rise, that's the purple area, and then they didn't know how much is in there. So they could only measure what came out. So that's why they're going into minus. And from that point, then the blue line, they could measure, okay, land keeps rising again. It seems to be filling up again. So they could measure how much was getting in there again. And then we saw the December eruption, and we could say how much was coming out, how much lava was flowing out. Then it goes down again. Then the land started rising again. That's the green line, right? Until we saw then the January eruption. The land was subsiding. We know how much did flow out. That's why we know how much the level of the magma chamber has decreased. Then the yellow line. And same thing going on, the light blue line. And then something weird happened on March 2nd. There was a teeny tiny magma intrusion, although the magma chamber was quite full again, but not much was flowing out. That's why just a little dip, and then it starts rising again. And then after that, March 16th, that's the red line. Land kept rising. And basically at the end of that red line, that's where we are right now. That's why they're saying each magma flow, like was it an intrusion or an eruption, has not exhausted the magma accumulation, this magma chamber. And therefore, that's why the initial position of the magma accumulation under Svartsengi is different in each cycle after November 2023. I know, guys, stay with me. It's going to be a longer one, but I find this is very, very interesting because I think we know a lot more about that magma chamber now. So the interesting part is it's not emptying out. And that's why, because people say, well, if the magma chamber is empty after an eruption, is there a risk that it might collapse and form a caldera? But if it's, you know, if there's at least 80 million cubic meters that would fit in there, and we're only adding always an amount between like 8 to 16, 20 million cubic meters so that it's full. So maybe it can hold 100 million cubic meters. So not much is flowing out in these past eruptions. So there is no risk that it will collapse, in my opinion, at the moment. The risk for collapse was probably higher on November 10th when it was shooting 80 million out. So they have released this graph again, and they want us to look at the Crustal eruptions again. And they're trying to compare this to try to find a pattern that they could transport over to what's happening at Svartsengi at the moment. The Crustal eruption happened back in 1975. So the science to really monitor and measure this was even worse than it is now. So this was going on for at least a 10-year period, and they had 20 magma flows within 10 years, and 9 of them, so a lot, did end in an eruption. And these magma flows all entered the same magma tunnel, but then they had different magnitudes. So what the MET Office is saying, basically the conclusion that they're drawing from these Crustal eruption and the experience shows that when the amount of eruptions or magma flows, let's call it magma flows, that's intrusion and eruption, increases, more pressure is needed to start the next one. They're saying that's why it must be considered probable that magma flows again from the magma chamber under Svartsengi to the Sutnuka crater series, but there is some uncertainty as to when sufficient pressure will be reached to start a new magma flow or for magma to reach the surface. So they know that they don't know. So if you look at that chart, it's not really too self-explanatory, but basically you look at that 10-year period that we just talked about, and then you see the formation of magma tunnels, that's the upper picture, and then the land elevation that they have measured in the middle of the Crustal crater. So that red chart here, the lower picture, shows the elevation that they were able to measure. They had one measuring point within the crater, and the upper graph shows where these metamorphic zones were in each event, so to speak. So the red color in the upper picture represents an eruption. So yeah, could you see a pattern there? If you see it's up and down that red chart, and then from 1981 it takes longer until there's the next event. So there was a little bit of a break. Is this so similar? I don't know, because with the current system, the volumes have really varied, and it's not been like gradually that each time you need much more. If you look at the old chart, so for the December eruption, there was more in the magma chamber than there was the January eruption, and less was needed. And then there was the February eruption, the yellow line, and there was even less. So I'm not 100% sure that I'm convinced. Of course, if we look at our current line right now, the red line, yes, it's more and more, right? But I don't see the gradual pattern there yet that they're mentioning. So I guess we will have to wait and see. Maybe they will release more detailed information about their theory here. Definitely what their conclusion is that it has now come to a point that the total volume in the magma chamber, so the total volume, not just the 16-17 million cubic meters that we're talking about right now, because there was more in the chamber in December if you look at that old graph. So I don't know why they're not mentioning this, but it's never been higher since the magma tunnel was formed on November 10th. And they're saying as time goes by without a new magma flow moving into the Sutnuka crater series, into the eruption area zone 3, the probability of magma moving to other areas where there is a weakness in the Earth's crust increases. And that's a point that is scary, because if it's not going into zone 3, it could go into zone 4 inside of Grindavík, because that 15-kilometer long magma dike has gone there. Could be south, could be going to Antwerp. They also do not rule out that it could come straight up, because with every land rise and land subsidence and land rise and subsidence, the Earth's crust gets more brittle. And we just talked about this in my last video with Campi Flegrei, that has this Brady seism, how they call it, land rise and land subsidence. And they said, well, basically there's a shallow magma chamber there at a depth of 4 kilometers. So same depth as we have here. And they're saying now it depends on how much that upper layer of rocks, how much that is holding out, preventing the magma from coming up. Do I think it's super likely that this will happen already? Or will it happen after a few more eruptions and land rise, land subsidence? But the risk is definitely there. And the Icelandic scientists have said that too. They don't think it's likely. But that's why I'm saying the probability of magma moving to other areas where there is a weakness in the Earth's crust increases. There's definitely a weakness in Svartsengi, but there's more weakness in the Sutnuka crater series, or there has been, of course. But there's weakness in Grindavik. Underneath Grindavik, it looks like a Swiss cheese. But of course, it needs to get to Grindavik. So, doesn't sound too good. I would completely stay out of that area if it was me. They're further saying small-scale seismic activity has persisted in recent weeks in the area south of Thorbjörn, in the large area that's at the doorstep of Grindavik. And in this area, there are weaknesses in the Earth's crust that magma could exploit to reach the surface, as I just said. So they're saying a magma flow from the magma chamber to the area south of Thorbjörn is at this point a less likely scenario than the ones mentioned above, but therefore this scenario is not taken into account in the updated risk assessment. And I think that's a mistake. They should take this into account, but they're saying the Norwegian Meteorological Agency will collect and process data in the coming days to shed more light to this possibility. So they're basically saying one thing, yeah, it could, but then they're reversing it. And you know what? If it was me, I think that whole hazard map would be deep purple right now. It would be deep purple. I would, just have essential personnel at the power plant, as, only if it's needed and not overnight. I would not have someone in Grindavik, maybe at the port, so with a very quick evacuation plan, but definitely no tourists, no golf courses, no restaurants, nothing like this. So what's the point that the residents are being paid out, that they're moving away if I'm hauling other people in like tourists, right? Doesn't make sense. I'm closing this video. I'm done for today. I think this was very, very interesting and did give us a lot more insight in what's going on with that magma chamber, guys. If you like this video, do me a favor, leave it a like so that the algorithm pushes it out a little bit further. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks for the coffee. You keep buying me on my Buy Me a Coffee site. If you want to buy me more, the link is in the description of this video. Thanks for that, guys. And thanks for your supers, your ongoing support, your wonderful comments. And I hope to see you very, very soon. There's a few very interesting videos in the end screen. Check them out. I'll see you in a few hours, I think. Bye-bye.